When we turn to the Bible to look at examples of individuals who can inspire us in our faith and our service to God, I think one of the most powerful people you'll find in the Scriptures is Job. You go back and read the entire book of Job and you see a man of great character and integrity. We have the expression, the patience of Job, but one of the greatest dimensions of his character was his dynamic faith, a man who stood head and shoulders above many and certainly served as a model for all of us as he does today. We find that in the 27th chapter of Job, in verses 5 and 6, the last part of verse 5, Job says, "Till I die, I will not remove mine integrity from me." And then key on verse 6 where he says, "My righteousness I hold fast and will not let go." This evening I want to talk about the idea of what Job says, and I'll use an illustration and apply it to our own lives. Key on the idea of just holding on. And think about that image. Think about the image of holding on to something tenaciously with resolve and determination not to let go. My righteousness I hold fast and will not let it go. And the key question for us to consider tonight is, do we hold as tenaciously to our faith as Job did? And I'd like to use an illustration, as I often do, throughout the entire presentation. And when I was thinking about holding on, it dawned on me one of the best ways to think of holding on is the subway. In my life, I have ridden the subway system in New York and Boston. The last time I was on a subway was in Istanbul. And Istanbul is a city of 12 to 15 million people, depending on how you count, sixth largest city in the world. And as you can imagine, a city that large and that compact and that dense, that their transportation is primarily, the subway and the metro rail, which Jennifer and I use quite a bit. And in a city of 12 million people, as you might guess, much, much bigger than New York, there are people everywhere, pedestrians everywhere you go. And as a result, of course, the best way to get around, just as in New York, is really the subway, the metro rail system. And riding the subway in Istanbul, like any subway in the world, and if you've ridden the subway, you know what I'm talking about, there are four things to bear in mind. This applies to other modes of transportation as well, but definitely the subway, because people just hop right on and hop right off. Four things to consider. The cars themselves are always crowded. At least they were in Istanbul. And when you get on, it's pretty much the feeling of being packed in like sardines. And often there are no available seats, and so you have to stand. And what they have done, of course, in subways is, and I'm going to use this belt to simulate a subway strap, is they have straps that, of course, are secured to the ceiling of the subway car, and they're hanging all along, and you grab onto one, and you hang on very tightly if you're wise, and secure, because those straps will keep you safe, they'll keep you vertical. And again, I want to use that image also of verticality. Think of our relationship with God, where we're standing righteously with God, that those straps are secured to something that is tough and foundational. And I want you to, as we go on, I want you to think about this image of the strap being our faith, and of course the connection being Jesus Christ. And that strap is what really makes a difference between our falling and having an injury, like falling in our faith, and standing upright. And consider also the laws of physics on the subway, that the reason they have those straps when you're standing and cannot sit, and even when you're sitting, you still want to hold on, but especially if you're standing, the laws of physics indicate that as you accelerate and decelerate, of course, you've got the motion pushing back and forth. And as you're swerving along the track, you're going to have the motion pushing you to the left and to the right. And any kind of other difficulty in riding the subway car is going to push you around. And if you're not holding on to this very tenaciously, one of two things will happen. You will either, lose your grip and fall, and especially you'll fall if you're not hanging on at all, or even maybe worse, you'll end up in somebody's lap who is sitting. You want to avoid both of those. The laws of physics control our lives, but the only control we have in a subway car, you might say, the security, is that strap. That strap becomes very important. And therefore, because of 1, 2, and 3, 4 is hang tight. In this case, literally. But tonight I want to take that and talk about hanging tight figuratively or metaphorically to our faith. Tying it back into what Job said about, I will not let it go. What is Job not going to let go until I die? It's his faith. It's his integrity. It's his righteousness. He says, I will not let anything allow me to let go of that strap. That is my faith in God. And I want you to consider this evening some things that actually can be a problem for us. I want you to consider what is the problem sometimes when we either don't hang on at all and the strap is there, or we hang on and let go, or we hang on loosely. Any of those. Any one of those, less than hanging on tightly and securely, can result in a fall. I want you to consider this evening the time we have 3 problems when we get on that subway, and of course each time I want to apply it to our faith. When we get onto that subway, one of the problems we might have is a sense of false security, or a false sense of security. In 1 Thessalonians 5, in verse 3, where the writer is actually talking about the second coming of Christ, he's talking there about the idea of this false sense of security. When Jesus Christ returns, he will return like a thief in the night. It will be instantaneous. There will be no warning. He will just come, and that will be it. It'll be a great joy for those who are prepared. It'll be horrific for those who aren't prepared. But notice in 1 Thessalonians 5, in verse 3, Paul says, for when they shall say, those who are kind of going along unprepared for the second coming, peace and safety. It is security. Then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. I want to take that idea of false security. We sometimes go along in life in our faith, maybe kind of relaxing. Again, back to the strap. We become faithful. We might take our faith for granted, and maybe we don't hold to our faith as securely as we should. By our lack of attendance at church is one manifestation of it. By our failure to be as conscientious in our behavior and not really living the kind of life we should, as we spoke this morning when we go out in the world, we kind of let up. We kind of think, peace and safety, I can relax. And actually, as children of God, we can never relax. Now, what I mean by that is I'm not saying we have to go around being tense all the time. I'm saying as a child of God, our conscientious, deliberate service to God should be at all times. There is no relaxation from our morality. There is no relaxation from our Christianity. And I want you to consider 3 points here as we go on in relation to this false security. The problem is we often relax when vigilance is required. And back to the image of being on a subway, we might get on there and think, something? The car hasn't taken off yet. Or maybe the car takes off very slowly. We think, I don't feel any herky-jerky motion. I don't feel any swerving or braking notion, so I'll just simply not hang on at all because peace and safety. We're lulled into the idea that it's safe and secure, so I won't hold on at all, or maybe I'll hold on loosely. We relax when vigilance is required, which leads to a second point. We fail to consider the forecast. And by forecast, I mean that when you get on a subway, you're either told or by what's there that you are to hold on to that. And when those straps are actually forecasting to you, you better hang on if you're standing up. If not, you're going to fall. And I want to give you an example in my own life about failing to heed a forecast. And by failing to heed a forecast, you end up having a false sense of security, which can be disastrous. A number of years ago, when I was actually, Jennifer and I were living in a town that was, it was exactly 82 miles from the university where I was doing my graduate work. And as a result of finishing that work, we were living so far away, I had to commute. This was back long before online learning, and I had to go and take my actual classes. There was one particular class I was taking in the spring, and when I got up that morning on my motorcycle, I miss my motorcycle. I had my motorcycle to commute every day, and you might think that 82 miles is a very long way to commute. It is. But once you do it over and over, it becomes routine. It's like a walk around the park. But anyhow, there's one particular morning in April, spring, when I got up, 82 miles east of the university campus, looked at the blue sky, not a sign of a cloud, and thought, what a beautiful day. What a great day it's going to be on my motorcycle. So then dressing up only in a T-shirt and my jeans and some construction boots, I took off with my books and took off on my bike, going along. As I got down to the university, finished my class, I think it was called the Philosophy of Language, got out, walked out to the motorcycle parking lot, looked to the eastern sky where I was headed. It was getting really dark. And this is 11:30 in the morning. I thought there's a storm coming, a bad one. Because I thought I'm going to be riding right into that storm which was coming that direction. Well, I had to make a decision. What am I going to do? I had nowhere to stay there in town. I wanted to get home. I'm going to go for it, see what happens. And so I took off, and surely enough, within the first few miles, it began to sprinkle. And then it began to rain. And there I am going along in this T-shirt, my jeans and my boots there, getting soaking wet, of course. And as cars might pass, that splashes water on a motorcyclist, and I was wet. On top of that, I was going along, and by the time I got on the highway, I thought I might as well go for it. Got out into the highway, and going between 60 and 70, wind chill. I was soaking wet, going along with that wind chill, and getting colder and colder all the way through. It was a long, wet motorcycle commute. Long story short, about an hour and a half or 2 hours later, by the time I got home, I was pretty much an icicle. That was the coldest I've ever been in my life. It was the most hypothermic I've ever been. And you ever get so cold where you're actually not only shaking, but you can't even speak because your mouth is almost frozen. Luckily, Jennifer was home that day, and she knew I was coming home. When I got home, I was just like this. I could hardly move. Luckily, I was able to get in the door and take off my clothing and put on some, and I got in that shower, that hot shower, and I don't know how long I stood in that water. Now, what's the point I'm making? The point is back to the idea of a forecast. If I had done the intelligent thing, which being a young, dumb kid I was at that time in my early 20s, I got up and just took off looking at the sky. What if I had read the forecast of the weather? If I had, which I hadn't done. If I had done that, as I do now, look at the forecast every day, I would have realized there was a storm coming in. And I still would have gone to my class, but I would have used wisdom and taken heavy clothing, a large raincoat, already had my helmet on, and maybe something to cover my boots. And I would have been much more comfortable, and I wouldn't have frozen to death that way. It was my failure to heed the forecast that gave me a false sense of security, and so I took off. And the point I'm making spiritually is we often go through life maybe relaxing too much, thinking I can let up on my spirituality, I can let up on my morality, I can let up on my righteousness. We can never let up on it. And going back to the subway car, the idea is that we want to hang on. And even though the car, back to the subway car, maybe hasn't taken off yet, or though maybe it's moving kind of smoothly, and you think, I don't feel any braking or deceleration or acceleration. I don't feel any swerving. We let up that way, and then we fall. In this case, we might fall literally in the floor into somebody's lap because of the lack of thinking ahead that you know that even though things are peace and safety now, it may not continue that way. So the point we make is hang to that strap. Hang to our faith no matter how smooth the ride seems. And as we go through life spiritually, no matter how maybe we go along in life thinking, I have no problems right now. I have no difficulties. I have no stress. Life is going great for me. And we start thinking, because life is going great for me, I can also relax in my spiritual life. That is a fallacy, the sense of false security. Proverbs 22 and verse 3 tells us that a shrewd man, that is a wise man, which I wasn't that day on my motorcycle, sees trouble coming. He sees something coming, and he lies low. He sees something out there that could be a problem, and he avoids it, either by running away or lying low. He avoids it. But the simple, that is the foolish, or use the words, the stupid, the people who don't think, walk into it and pay the penalty. It'd be like a person walking along and looking out at the sidewalk to make sure there are no potholes I might step into and avoid them. Whereas the fool just walks along, is basically an idiot, and just steps right all up and falls and hurts himself. So false security can be a problem we have sometimes in our faith. A second one is overconfidence. In 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12, the Apostle Paul talks about the problem we have sometimes with this false sense of security. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to paraphrase it. He says, take heed. Those of you who think you are strong, take heed lest you fall. And the context there, he's talking about spirituality, about people who might go along thinking, I'm strong, I'm stalwart in my faith, nothing can happen to me, being very overconfident. But then as a result of that, because you think you are so strong, you aren't paying attention to the forecast, and then you fall when something comes along. We foolishly think, I got this, when we really don't. How many times have you found yourself in a situation where you're very confident in yourself, maybe overconfident, and thought, I got this, and maybe you don't. Maybe the I got you gets the better of you where you lose your sense of judgment. Like that commute on my motorcycle, I figured, hey, it's a beautiful day. I can fly on my bike and get back, and I got this. I can handle it. But I found out the hard way that I suffered that day because of that. And I want to give you a biblical example, a good scriptural, I think the best one I can think of a person with overconfidence, the Apostle Peter. In Mark 14:31, and again, I'm going to paraphrase this. You can check the verse on your own. Jesus had just told Peter, and of course, Jesus being prophetic and, omniscient, he knew this. Peter, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. Now, when Peter heard that, he's basically thinking, oh, no way. And he even says, Lord, in that context, I will die for you. If I will die for you, I'm certainly not going to deny you with my mouth. And he was so confident of that. In the same verse, if you notice in the King James, he says he vehemently denied it. Vehement means violence or passion. So you could almost see him standing there saying, Lord, I will never do that. It's almost like, how dare you say that I will deny you? It will not happen. And Christ just stood there and looked at him because Christ knew that he would. But Peter felt, because of overconfidence, rather than looking at himself and even considering, well, would I? He says, no way that will happen. And of course, we can understand that. We might have been the same way. We often look back at biblical figures when they make decisions, think, oh, I wouldn't have done that. We might have done the very same thing, Lord, I will not, and then do it. Later on, one of the saddest scenes in the Bible is later on in that verse when the cock crew and Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. You remember that Jesus just turned and looked at him. That's where a look can say 1,000 words. And the conclusion there is that Peter went out and wept bitterly. You got to imagine what kind of weeping that was. And I'm sure he was a better man for that because he learned of his overconfidence to be more careful. I will not deny thee in any wise, but he did it 3 times. He learned from that. Getting back to a more practical example in our lives today, too often we overestimate ourselves. I'll give you an example of that. Back in my undergraduate days, I took classical Greek or ancient Greek, elementary, intermediate, and advanced. And Professor Robert Lowe, who was a professor of Latin, he was a brilliant man. He taught Latin, French, German, and Greek, so he knew it all. Great man. And you got to imagine him also, characterization. He looked kind of like Einstein. He was your stereotypical professor. Bald on the top, white hair kind of sticking out, glasses on his nose. He was like a crusty old bachelor. He wasn't married. He had on kind of almost disheveled clothing, an old shirt. And great professor, brilliant man. But you got to visualize that. The first day of class in that winter semester of Greek 101, the very elementary level, we had a class of about, I'd say maybe as many as 20 students. First day of class. And of course, we're all there ready to study, learn classical Greek for different motivations that we had. We met 3 days a week. And we began to look around, some of us who stayed in the course, we began to look around as each class went on, and we were getting down to like 1 student less per class. We look around and somebody's missing, never to return. By about the 3rd week, we looked around, and I think there were 7 of us in the class out of 20. And one of the students said, Dr. Lowe, what's going on here? He just put his head back and laughed and said, this is exactly what I wanted. Because he said, people come into this class thinking, oh man, I got this Greek, I can handle this, as if they were going to just learn by osmosis. We're going to come into class and Greek will just kind of come down and we'll learn it. But then they go along and begin to realize very quickly, it's a lot of work to learn classical Greek. You learn a new vocabulary, you learn a new alphabet, how to use those letters. You learn grammar you may not have in English. You learn declensions of adjectives and nouns. You have to learn verb conjugations. You've got to even put those little diacritical marks, those little not punctuation. There are marks you put on letters, and in Greek those are very important. You got to learn all those. In other words, learning Greek is not easy. Not the most popular course on campus either, as you could guess, but the point is those 20 were whittled down to the 7 of us. And surely enough, Dr. Lowe said this is exactly what I expected. I was wanting to get the people who will stay with me and work hard, and here you are. And surely enough, we stayed all the way through several years, all the way through advanced Greek and graduated together. And he's figuring the people who are here, who are so overconfident, they will begin to realize they're not as confident or not as strong as they thought they were, and they'll drop out, and they did. He said it happens every time I start a new group of students, and it's what happened there. These were people who begin to overestimate themselves and think they were something they weren't. We can do the same thing spiritually. We can do that in the sense of overestimating our abilities by a lack of humility and thinking, I got this, Lord, I got this. Like Peter, I'm not going to deny you. We might be the same way. We should never take our faith for granted. We should never take our strength for granted, thinking we're stronger than we really are. And so the point we make, D, is hang to that strap no matter how strong you feel. When that car's moving along and you think, I can let go because I can stand here and secure myself. Yeah, sure. And the first time that car takes off or stops, you'll be the first one on the floor because of your own arrogance and your pride there. Hang on no matter what. A third problem we have is distraction. If you go back to the 19th chapter of Genesis, back in the Old Testament, we read, of course, the case of Lot and Lot's wife. There are many lessons that come out of this, but the one I want to point to is in the 19th chapter in verse 17. They're given instructions to get out of Sodom. In verse 17 of Genesis 19, escape for their life, that city is going to be destroyed, so get out of there, go. And look not behind you. Don't look behind you. The instruction was just don't do it. No matter what your rationalization is, like, well, why not? Why can't I? Just do what I say. Don't look back. Stay thou in the plain, get out on the plain and take off and keep going and don't look back. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. You get as far away as possible. Problem was, in human nature, there's some people, and that includes us, we're not always satisfied with God's instruction. And we think, maybe I can kind of fudge here a little bit. And so we're told in verse 26 of the same chapter, but his wife, Lot's wife, looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. She was destroyed. She lost her life because of that. There was a distraction there. When she was running away and had her mind set on that by God's instruction, she was distracted by probably thinking about, I want to look back, and maybe she was thinking about people that she liked there. We don't know what it was, but something distracted her and made her look back at that particular site, and she had been told not to do it. And so because of her distraction, she lost her life in that situation. We want to make the point of we should focus on what we're doing, but be aware of distractions. Colossians 3:1-2 tells us that we are to put our whole mindset on Jesus Christ above and look forward in that sense. But you take a passage like Ephesians 5:15, Paul says we should also live circumspectly, which means looking around. The word circumspect is a Latin derivation. It means to look all around you at all times. So yes, focus your attention on where you're going, but also be aware of what's going on around you. And again, I want to give you an example of that from my own life. In my freshman year of college, I took a course, actually this summer. I was eager to begin college, so I took 3 summer school courses just to get started right after high school. And one of the classes I took was just elementary speech, a part of my program. I had a teacher, Mr. John Knowles, a really good speech teacher, a wonderful teacher. And he was talking once about the importance of paying attention to what's going on around you. He was talking about giving speeches. When you're giving speeches, pay attention around you. He gave us an example that occurred in his own life as a much younger man. I would say at that time he was probably in his 40s or 50s at that time. But he gave us an example of the importance of paying close attention to what you're doing and looking all around from his own life. He said that when he was, I guess maybe in his 20s or late teens, or a very young man, there was a girl whom he admired a great deal, a very pretty young lady. And of course, like any young man who sees a pretty girl and is attracted, could I get a date with her? Could I ever get to know her? He finally got around to arranging a date where he asked her out and she said yes. And of course, he was just ecstatic about that. And so naturally, because this is the girl he wants to impress, he gets dressed up very nicely, goes out to a very posh, very nice restaurant somewhere, and they sit down for their dinner. And of course, when they were sitting there, they had their drinks first. I don't know if it was tea or cola or alcoholic drinks, but it doesn't matter. They had their beverages brought out. Now, of course, he's sitting there just totally caught up in her beauty and being polite and looking at her, as you would, because he wants to give her his undivided attention. And as he's sitting there at the table looking at her as she's speaking, he's smiling and acknowledging her. He starts to pick up his drink. And in his glass, he had, it was either a swizzle stick or a very small straw, whatever it was in his glass. Now, a swizzle stick is very hard to see because they're usually clear like this, transparent. They're made of plastic usually, and they're very solid and very hard. And when they're in your glass, they barely stick up. You're probably ahead of me already. So without even looking at what he was doing, but looking at her, he picks up his glass in one kind of a quick motion, and I'm not going to do it, but this swizzle stick went right up his nostril, up his nose. Seriously. Now, the point I'm making is this. First of all, that's painful to begin with. That's going to hurt. If you've ever had something very solid go up your nose accidentally, very painful. But not only that, but it sets off a series of reactions. Because what will often happen is you'll start coughing. There's a good chance your eyes will maybe water a little bit because of the kind of constrict, whatever it sets off. And maybe even worse of all, a liquid may start coming out of your nose. Evidently, in that case, all three of those began to happen at once. He was doing all of that. Now, I don't know how she reacted to that. I don't know if she was very gracious and just simply overlooked it, or I don't know what it was. But he told us he was absolutely mortified and humiliated, as we would be also. And the point he was making is that when you're going through life and focusing on something, in this case his date, that's fine, but also don't forget to focus on things going around. Like when you're driving, you look in the mirrors, the rear view, the side mirrors, you look around, because even though you've got to focus on the road, you can't ignore what's going on. We have to be the same way. We have to kind of be in a certain sense, we have to be looking all around at all times. And so the idea is hang to that strap no matter what surrounds you. And back to my example of the subway, when you've got your hand up there, you may have your hand up there and think, I got to hang on to this because of the laws of physics, because of the inertia and the swerving of the car. You may think that, but something else might happen. Pretty girl. Somebody else on the subway that starts a conversation with you, whatever it might be. Or maybe you're looking at something, you really get you like, wow, that's beautiful, whatever that is. And as a result of being distracted that way, you may then let up on this or let go altogether and think, wow. Or have a conversation with somebody, having forgotten that you let go of the strap, and then there goes the subway, and there you go into the floor. So the idea is pay attention to the focus of your activity, but also be aware of what goes around. What we conclude from all of this then is that hold tightly to your faith, not allowing a false sense of security, not allowing our overconfidence, and not allowing any kind of distractions to divert us from our service to the Lord. And we go back to the way we started. We're told of Job that he held fast to his righteousness. And he said in the preceding verse, I will never, until the day I die, and even then, let go of my integrity. And the lesson, of course, is for us to do the very same thing with our faith today. If you're here this evening and you haven't obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you want to do that, we encourage you to do it. If you're here as a member of the Lord's body, but you have sinned in such a way that you want the prayers and the thoughts of the members here to pray for you, we would encourage you in either case to come forward this evening as we all stand and sing.